Hi and welcome back to ScottiesTech.Info. I'm Scotty with my co-host Cletus. I do a lot of computer fixing, colleagues, friends, families, clients, whatever. And usually the person says, hey Scotty, my computer is just dirt slow. Okay, it's only 3 or 4 years old, but like it takes forever for programs to load, everything gets all bogged down, and so on and so forth. So usually I go, thinking at first like, oh, maybe they have a normal hard drive, they need an SSD, maybe they need more RAM, maybe this. And then I take a look at the computer and I discover a certain number of things that most of these people are actually doing totally wrong. So I decided to make a video about the 10 things you can do to make your computer run faster. And most of them are simply changing how you use your computer a little bit, and suddenly you'll discover that you'll get a lot more speed and it won't cost you a dime. So the first thing you want to do is to limit the number of open programs that you are running. Now, most people actually get this one okay. It's rather rare, but there have been enough instances where basically you've got your web browser, your email client, your text editor, and then you're like doing a video edit or something, so you leave that open, and you're editing photos, so you leave that open, and you just leave everything open. And operating systems, even Windows 10 and 11, they're better at managing memory and stuff, but the first thing is like, just don't leave everything running all the time, close it. Nowadays, especially on smartphones, people do this a lot. They make it so that you can open stuff, you swipe and you tap the square, you swipe left and right, and all your programs are open. Every time you restart your phone, it has to reopen all that stuff. So I think because of the whole mobile thing, people have gotten back into this mode of just like run stuff and leave it open. Yeah, don't do that. When you're done using something, close it. As I said, that's not, most people are kind of fairly good at that, but there's a trick you can do to see which programs you really want to close. So what you're going to do, you're on your desktop here, and you're going to type Control-Alt-Delete, and then click Task Manager. And when you do that, you're probably going to have something like this, so click on More Details, and what that's going to do is give you a tabbed view here. It's going to default to Processes, and what you see is all the apps that you have running. There's also a whole ton of background processes, but mostly what you want to do is you want to look at the list of apps here. So you can see I have Brave running, Firefox, Malware, Snagit, screen recording software, Windows desktop gadgets for my little calculator. But you can see over here in the CPU column, this is how much CPU power that application is using. If one of these has been running for a long time and is hogging a lot of CPU, close it. But the main thing you want to look at is the memory usage. So over here you can see, say, like I just opened Firefox and Brave like 2 minutes ago. Right. There are like 2 tabs open in Firefox and 1 in Brave, and you can see that Brave is using 267 megs of RAM, and Firefox is using 575 megs of RAM. This is probably a good time to note that Firefox, despite all of its improvements, is still a total memory hog. Right. The point is, though, you can kind of come in here and you can say like, geez, I don't have very much RAM. My Firefox is using like, 2 gigabytes of RAM. Oops, I better close Firefox. So you can do that on the taskbar. So, right, that just lets you know, like, okay, which of your programs are heavy and, which ones you want to be sure to close when you're done using them. Just kind of a useful little tip. The next thing is you can click down here in the system tray and you see all this stuff. These are all like little icons, like if you're running Skype, you'll see the little green circle and so on. The next thing to do is to remove useless startup programs because, of course, every time Windows boots, if you have a lot of stuff running at startup, the boot time, it slows down because it's got to fire up all those programs. Maybe you run Telegram, Skype, Google Updater, but all this stuff is there. Some of it you may not even know it's there. So there are 2 tricks you can use for this. You click the Start button and just type Startup, and right, then under Settings it'll say Startup Apps, and these are all the apps that fire up when you first turn on your computer or after you reboot. So certain things you don't want to turn off, like for example Cortana. I'm pretty sure if you turn that off you don't get Windows Search anymore. I can't remember if they changed that or not. A lot of this stuff, if you don't know what it is, like delayed launcher Intel Corporation, well, I have Intel integrated graphics, so no, I want to leave that on. Dragon Center, this is an MSI laptop. Dragon Center is their software. I don't really need that starting on boot. Some of this other stuff I turned off. Power DVD for like watching Blu-ray discs or DVDs or something. Don't do that very often. I don't need it to start up automatically because I can just come and manually click the icon and run the program. All a lot of this stuff is doing is just like running in the background, eating up memory, eating up system resources, so it can like, prompt you like, ooh, there's an update for Power DVD 20. Well, who cares? They send me an email anyway, right? And of course, you're going to have to kind of guess here, but a lot of the stuff you can look at and you can go, well, right, I don't need Power DVD to run anything in the background. I just wanted to do stuff when I double click and load the actual program. If you're unsure about some other things, you can disable it, reboot, and if something goes wrong, just come back in here and re-enable it, and your computer won't melt or anything. So that's the first thing to do. The second thing you want to do to check for startup programs is type Windows key R for the run dialog, and then type in shell, it's already there, but shell startup, shell : startup, and then hit enter. And what that's going to do is open your program startup folder. And as you can see here, I have a little shortcut for my Windows gadgets, which I like this calculator thingy. You may have other programs in here. Each one of these will just be a shortcut, and some of them may not be listed in the startup in settings, but they will actually show up here. And any ones you don't want, you can just click and just delete the shortcut, and there you go. Then the next time you reboot, your machine should fire up a bit faster. So the third thing you can do is don't leave a lot of clutter on your desktop. And I see this one a lot. I get to the person's computer, I start working, and it's like, I go like, oh my God, what is all this crap you have on your desktop? And they've got like, multiple like 2 gigabyte files that are like a bunch of, videos they edited, and it's like sometimes they have 2 screens, and like both screens are just filled with icons and like Word documents and PDFs and stuff they've downloaded and movies and right. The reason you don't want to leave a bunch of crap on your desktop is because every time Windows fires up and during certain other operations, it has to scan through all the icons and files and folders on your desktop. So right, if you're one of those people that just kind of dumps everything on the desktop, you may notice that when, especially when your computer starts up, what'll happen is you'll see the desktop, the background wallpaper will show up, and you'll get a bunch of like white blank icons, and then after a few seconds, suddenly they'll all appear as the files that they are. That's a pretty good indication that you've got too much crap on your desktop. So there's a simple trick you can do to eliminate that while still keeping a bunch of crap on your desktop if you want. So what you do is, say you have a bunch of files, like say this, I've got these, all this crap up here, right? I got all this stuff, and let's say these are, giant movie files, blah, blah, blah. It's like, hundreds of files or something. Well, all this stuff is stored on the desktop because if you right-click and create a new folder on the desktop, it's stored on the desktop. So the trick is you run Explorer, and I have actually 2 hard drives in this computer, so I'm going to pick my data drive D. If you have only 1 drive, that's fine. You just go to C drive instead. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click and just create a new folder, and I'm going to say like stuff, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag all of these folders. Well, first I'm going to highlight them by left-clicking and dragging. Then I'm going to right-click on one of them and hold and drag to the stuff folder that I just created, but I'm not going to do copy to stuff. This is why I'm doing a right-click drag. When I let go of the right mouse button, I have the option Move Here. So I'll click that, and now all of that stuff that used to be there is in my D stuff. So I come back to D, and I again right-click on stuff and drag it over to the desktop and say Create Shortcuts here. Now, of course, that's annoying. If you don't want it to be called Stuff-Shortcut, you can just type F2 and edit the name. Boom. Now I have a folder called Stuff, and every time I actually put stuff into the Stuff folder, it's not actually going to my desktop. It's actually going into D/stuff. And that's a little trick you can do so that you can keep a bunch of stuff on your desktop. You have to organize it a little bit, But the next time, say I download like 3 video files or something, I can just take those and I can right-click or drag them into the stuff shortcut here, and instead of being put on my desktop, they'll be put in d:/stuff. So what that means is that all the stuff is not stored on the desktop. The shortcuts to those files, the links to those files are stored in the desktop, but the content, the data itself is stored in another folder. And when Windows goes to scan the desktop, even if you have a ton of folder shortcuts or file shortcuts, those are links, so that's just going to load really quickly because it doesn't have to scan through everything. All it has to do is, say, draw the yellow icon, the folder icon for stuff, instead of scanning through all the different files. So that's kind of a handy tip. The next thing is web browsers. This one is what I see the most. When you're using any web browser, don't leave like 200 tabs open. That's really, really bad. I mentioned earlier, especially if you're using Firefox, Firefox is still an epic resource hog. And I can't count the number of times someone said to me like, oh, my computer's so slow. And I go to their computer and I'm like, you're using Firefox, aren't you? Yeah. Okay, open up Firefox. And then, you click the little arrows and they scroll left and right and the tabs just keep going forever. There are like hundreds and hundreds of them in there. And I'm like, hey, do you actually know what those tabs are? And they're like, yeah, it's stuff I wanted to read. Some of it's from like a month ago. And I'm going like, you know what a bookmark is, right? So you don't want to keep a lot of tabs open in Firefox or in Chrome. Chrome is obviously, it's used by more people. It's a more efficient browser. But still, the more tabs you have open, the more memory it takes, the slower the browser loads. It kind of bogs everything down. And you can use that task manager trick where you look, and especially with Firefox, you'll see that it will easily eat up 3-4 gigabytes of RAM, and it will start to get really, really, really slow. So use bookmarks in your browser. There are like certain like tab grouping add-ons you can use. You have to be careful with those because many of the new tab group add-ons for different web browsers, what they tend to do is sort of, you don't see that you have a million tabs open, but in fact they can actually be loaded in the background even though you don't see them. So it's pretty much the same as if you didn't have that extension. In the olden days that was a little bit different, but you have to be careful if you use a tab group add-on because it's not always doing what you think it's doing. So the best thing to do is to, make a new bookmarks folder, bookmark stuff, close the tab, and then, like once a month, go back and you'll see your list of like 1,000 bookmarks and you'll go, all right, I'm never going to look at that stuff again, and you delete it. That's far better than having 1,000 tabs open in your web browser. Speaking of web browsers, the next thing you want to do to keep your computer fast is to restart regularly. Now, the reason I mention this in relation to web browsers is that the other thing I see, besides like 200 open tabs all the time, is that people never, ever, ever restart their web browser. If you're the kind of person that has 200 tabs open all the time, yes, even with automatic updates, you should probably restart your web browser at least once a day, assuming you leave your computer running overnight. And the reason for that is that they're just still not really awesome at memory management, and each day you're kind of starting with a whole new, it's kind of like rebooting the browser. You know that if you reboot Windows, everything runs better. Do the same thing with your web browser, do the same things with your applications, because the longer most applications run, the less sort of stable they become, and sometimes, as in the case with Firefox, the more memory it eats and the slower your entire computer becomes. You also have to restart Windows regularly, and this one I see about half the time, even with automatic updates. If you're opening and closing stuff a lot of time, if you're the kind of person that's like constantly, accessing different types of files, and you open this program, you edit this Word doc, and you close that, and you open this Excel sheet, and you close that, and you're moving files around all the time. And the more stuff you do after rebooting Windows, generally speaking, the pokier everything's going to become. And in many, many cases, the person's saying, oh, when I try to search for something, I click the start button and I type search and it's not finding anything. I'm like, well, have you rebooted recently? Because maybe it's not, maybe it installed a Windows update in the background and it hasn't actually rebooted automatically yet, blah, blah, blah. And most of the time, simply rebooting will fix a lot of these issues. So you also want to reboot you know, if you do everything else I'm telling you, you can probably reboot like once a week and you'll be fine. But yeah, if there are no Windows updates coming down the pipeline, like I've seen computers that haven't been rebooted for like 2 months, and everything is just so slow, and like half the stuff, even in Windows, like search and everything doesn't work, and it just kind of gets all bogged down. And I've also seen computers where you can run them for 2 months and open and close programs and they're perfectly stable. That depends on a variety of factors, and yours might be perfectly stable in that sense, and you may not have to do that. But it's a good thing to do anyway. Restart your app, your programs when you're running them. Restart Windows. Just restart everything regularly, and you'll be a lot happier. Next, this one may seem kind of obvious, but it's not. Don't leave a bunch of like USB sticks and external drives plugged into your computer all the time. Now, there are some exceptions to this. For example, if you have an external, like a small external drive that you're using as a backup drive for, say, like file history or my robo backup script or whatever, then obviously, yes, you want to leave that drive plugged in all the time. But I see a lot of people, like they've got like they've got a hard drive to back up their video files on, and then they have like 2 USB sticks, and one's plugged in here and the other's plugged into a hub, and they just leave it all plugged in. In many cases, that actually kind of makes everything slow down, especially during boot, because it's got to like look at all these drives and scan everything. And in some instances, things can get a little wonky, and it's like the computer starts looking at all these drives all the time, and over time it starts to slow things down more and more and more. So if you're not using a USB stick or an external hard drive or something, just unplug it. That's not as common as the other problems, but I have seen some really, really weird things, and I'm going like, what is the problem here? This is bizarre. And then I looked at this old USB stick, and I pulled the USB stick out, everything started working perfectly again. And I managed to do some tests and figure out that having the USB stick plugged in for like more than 5 minutes was causing some problem, and it's weird stuff happens. It's Windows. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is make sure that you have a lot of free space on your C drive. So if we go into this PC, you see here you have Windows is my boot drive, my installation drive, and it says C:, that's my C drive, and you can see it says 316 gigs free of 475 gigs. That's great. When this little blue bar here starts to get really close to the end, that means your C drive is filling up, and this is increasingly rare because hard drives are getting very, very big and cheap, and Windows is not growing at an equal pace. So it's less and less frequent, but especially if you have an older computer, you never want to let your C drive get full. And if it is full, then you either need to install a second drive or just get like a backup drive, like an external hard drive, plug it into the USB port, and move a bunch of files off of your C drive to clear up space on here. This one, as I said, it's less of a problem these days, but I still see it from time to time. And usually the person goes, "Oh, you mean my drive shouldn't be full?" And I generally tell people, make sure your C drive is like at least 50% free. Not because it needs to be 50% free, but it kind of reminds them to keep everything tidy. And the problem here is that when your C drive actually fills up, Windows freaks out and it goes, "Oh my God, there's no hard drive space." It won't actually tell you that you have no space left on your C drive until it's basically too late. So just make sure you have like a minimum of like 25% of the space free, and you should be fine. Okay, next, keep your programs up to date. Most things like web browsers, they have an automatic update mechanism. There you go. If you're using, say, screen recorder software or something, right, you don't want to get into a situation where suddenly it stops working and you're going, "Oh, I don't understand." And people don't like updates these days because of, like, say, the problem with Windows 10 updates. But the fact is that software updates, generally speaking, they include bug fixes and enhancements because things change. Windows changes, and the software is running on top of Windows. And when Windows changes, if you don't change the program you're running on top of it, you get problems. So pay attention to any update mechanisms that exist for any applications you have. And unfortunately, that includes the next point, which is keep Windows up to date. Had a recent client where he said, "Oh, geez, there's a problem with my computer." And I discovered he was running Windows 10 version 1909. And I'm like, that's like Windows 10 from like 3 years ago. Like, why didn't you update? And of course, he's having all these problems. I updated everything. Everything starts working beautifully again. Things change. And so, yes, you even need to keep Windows 10 up to date or Windows 11. Keep everything up to date and you'll be much happier. Things will run much more smoothly. And especially you want security updates. Yeah, it's just better. And finally, you want to use some sort of anti-malware software. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I use Malwarebytes. The reason I use this is because it's awesome. It also runs alongside Windows Defender, so Malwarebytes is not really antivirus. Windows Defender, which is built into Windows, it does the antivirus stuff, and it catches something like 82% of the baddies. Malwarebytes is to sort of protect you against like zero-day malware, ransomware, that kind of thing. You can use something else if you want. I like Malwarebytes. It's always saved me. It's never failed. It's not that terribly expensive. And the reason you want some kind of malware protection is because, as I said, Windows Defender, maybe 80% of the time, it'll detect the baddies, but not all of them. And you don't want to be in a situation where your computer is bogged down, it's running slow, and then you go, oh, it's because I've got malware that's trying to like encrypt my hard drive in the background, and that's why it's slow, that sort of thing. So, yes, give Malwarebytes a try if you don't have anything else besides the built-in Windows Defender. And if you do these other 9 things I listed, your computer will run much faster and you'll be much happier. That's it. For more techie tips, see ScottiesTech.Info. Thanks for watching. See you next time.